Okay. So Michael, you're going to start the meeting, right? Yep.
Thank you. Good morning to all. Yeah, it would help right away. Good morning to all. Today's April 26th, subcommittee meeting for the budget. At this time, I want to introduce the members of my subcommittee. I am the chairman. Members are Carol Ty and John Kingston. Other people that have attended the meeting, to my right is Stacy Bronson Rizzo. To my left, Susan Gravelisi, Mayor Brian Arrigo, Superintendent Diane Kelly, CFO Matt Cruz, Assistant Superintendent Danielle McColber, Richie Galucci, Assistant Superintendent, sorry, and famous Robin Panzini, and the CFO of the city, Richard Viscay. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up to this meeting. At this time, I think I would like to have Matt just give us an overview of what's going on with this budget.
Thank you, Michael. So, page 1 of the working budget that was sent actually in mid-March is the thing that I'll do a quick review of. This is our first lengthy conversation about the FY23 budget. There are a lot of moving parts in the month of April and early May that are coming together, but it's still important, and we should be able to have a fruitful conversation of the big ideas. So the way that we lay this out for you is the first thing we show you is the revenues that will be appropriated for the school department. That's the combination of Chapter 70 funding that comes from the state and the minimum contribution that the city needs to make to the education of her students. So that's our first subline there of 125 million, and that is up 6 million from last year. Underneath that, you see the breakout of some funds the city will actually do the spending for us. Those are called city chargebacks, costs that they legitimately spend on behalf of education in the city. So they'll take those off the top of our budget. And then the second line that you see are the excludable costs. That's funding that the city needs to contribute to the education department, including for transportation, that they kick back to us to do the spending. So that nets out. And in this first version of the budget, we're looking at a net of an increase of $7 million to the school department to do her work for next year. Unlike in previous years, you can see on this cover page that there's a sub-breakout for transportation, which is probably the first thing we'll want to talk about, which is showing a dramatic increase in costs to the city for getting the kids to school next year. So you can see that that is showing a $3.5 million budget increase from last year. Now, as the committee knows, we've been talking on a monthly basis, if not more, about managing transportation costs. And so there's a ton of backup to this number, but this is our best estimate of what it will cost with our current practices in place around transportation to get the students to their schools next year. That is a dramatic increase. That's why we've broken it out for you to see. It's the one increase on the front page that is unusual from previous years. And so I'm sure that's something that we'll want to talk about. What we've done in business finance and superintendent office is work with the current assumptions in place in mid-March to begin to build out a budget for you. You've been given the 125 pages of backup on that. And all of that work has us at this moment in the black, $60,000 for working toward a balanced budget. But that's with some big assumptions in place. Let me just go over the bottom of this, and then we'll probably want to talk transportation together first. So there's other important notes to keep in mind. Each year we mobilize a certain amount of money to keep classroom teaching staff in place. That's money that we would not have spent in the previous year that carries forward for net school spending purposes. The last several fiscal years, that number has been pegged at 7 million, and that's what we're planning on again for this year. Underneath this is an important note for you to just keep in mind. ESSER 2 covered a lot of staff last fiscal year that it will not this year. So we have moved $1.2 million worth of instructional staff into our budget off of ESSER 2. And in the detail pages, you've seen where we've done that. We are also doing some decision-making around mobilizing ESSER 3. And so there are still some funding available to be decided on the when of mobilization for that from ESSER 3. So we wanted to show you that here. And then don't forget that we are hustling to build a reserve fund that will help carry us through when these ESSER infusions of money dry up. So that first amount of money has been planned to be the 3.6. But again, this is all just up for decision-making in this process. But we have targeted, we would like to carry 3.6 forward in a reserve fund. So that's available to you in the future to deal with the end of the ESSER term funding. So that's the biggest stuff on the front page. And I think the first thing to talk about is managing that increase in transportation. There is a sense in which the city is responsible to get the students housed and transported, and the school department is responsible to do the educating of the kids. But this is also the kind of fiscal problem that we would be tackling in concert with, in tandem with, in conversation with the city, as that's a big funding item for them as they're building out their budget this year. So there's your big picture. Net school spending being up is a good thing. It's up less than we had anticipated it may be. And then managing this transportation figure together is the first point of business, and then we can move on to other details from there.
At this point, does anybody have any questions? John, Carol, first of all? Nope. Carol?
Very thorough explanation. I'm concerned, of course, as we all are, about the ESSER cliff. And I like that, your choice of words on that. I know that the target could change, so we'll proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else in the committee have a question?
Your committee?
I've already asked them. I'm just asking in general. Nope. Okay, Madam.
I have a question.
Okay, I'm sorry, Aisha. I'm sorry, I forgot to acknowledge that you're here on Zoom. I'm sorry, Aisha Milbury Ellis is here on Zoom with us. Go ahead, Aisha.
Oh, that's no problem at all. I just have a question. Do we have an idea as to when the ESSER money do we have a projected date as to when that money is gonna start to run out?
Sure, the term on those three individual grants are clearly spelled out. So the ESSER 3 money is available to us all the way through the coming fiscal year. So it's not until June 30th of 2023 that ESSER 2 will extend, and then ESSER 3 has an additional term after that. So we're trying to manage ourselves to be prepared to make best of use of them in their time, and then be ready to subsume some of those costs on the term ends.
Thank you.
Ms. Bronson Rizzo.
So we know transportation is probably the major problem that we do have with this budget. Has there been any discussion on how to rectify some of the areas?
So, and I think that's part of the conversation that the mayor's office wanted to have with you today, which is why Rich is here. So, I mean, in terms of our ability to control costs for transportation, the one thing that we could do is eliminate some of the non-mandatory transportation that we currently provide to students. And we made a first step in that direction last year when we said that we would transport high school students only if they lived more than 2 miles from the high school they attend. and that we would only transport middle school students if they lived more than a mile from the middle school they were going to attend. Those are services that we are not required by state law to provide. So those are areas that if we wanted to change our services in order to increase savings, we could look there. But, and Matt, you can speak to this. The bulk of the cost for the transportation increase is in outside special education placements, and those we are required to provide by law. So that's not something that we can reclaim any funding on.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
We had a presentation maybe a month ago or 2 months ago from Ms. Center, the new Director of Transportation, in which we would switch around, and instead of using big buses, we'd use smaller ones and so forth. So is that reflected in the budget, Matt, that we would be using a different kind of transportation in order to save money?
So yes, that's right. There's already been some cost-saving steps that have been taken. We are out to bid right now for the regular transportation, the yellow buses for the new coming fiscal year, and also for special education inside the district runs. And one of the ways that we're hoping to affect cost savings is by replacing multiple minivans with a fewer number of small buses making those runs. So those bids are out right now. In the backup to the budget for this item, you can see that we've level funded the special education inside, expecting cost savings to happen with that. The mix of challenges here is increased number of students needing to be transported to schools across every category: special ed inside, special ed outside, homeless students who live in Revere, homeless people, students who lived in Revere and lived somewhere else, early childhood, special education, all of them. And also the costs of the runs happening, and also the eliminating of the extended learning program put all 3 of our middle schools ending at the same day, which increased the need for more drivers and buses to get those kids home. So all of those have had their effect to drive this higher. If you sat in the details, you would see how this is working. Oh, this run used to be $195 a day, and now it's $450 a day. That's the kind of cost increases that just statewide people are looking at, which is why the cost is being driven up by 49% from year to year.
Matt, I have one question. Is the current vendor's contract ends June 30th?
The current regular transportation vendor's contract ends June 30th, yes.
Or is it all the transportation or just particular?
So the students who are driven to special education schools outside of the district across the Commonwealth, those are bid on an annual basis. So you do the bid in the summer, and that's their run for the year. The regular transportation is bid on a 3-year basis. But again, just one more anecdote. We did the work. We perfected those specifications. We sent them out 6 to 8 weeks ago. We have a single vendor interested in doing that work, just one. Bid has come in. So that's another one of the challenges that's happening Commonwealth-wide, and the competition that would typically drive down prices is not happening at this current moment, which is why the budget that you see is so high. My first job as the CFO is to be accurate about what we anticipate those costs to be, and now we're working on, so what action can we take to lower that? But that actual number is tied down to reality. There's not a bunch of fat built into that number. That's what it will cost next year, all else equal, based on our experience this year.
Thank you. Okay, right now, Richie Viscay would like to say a few words from the city.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't see you. I didn't speak. Go ahead.
I was just going to answer.
Thousands. All mom and pop shops. I was going to start.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Rich Viscay. I'm the CFO of the city, and Thank you for having me here today, and as was just discussed, all transportation for the school district as picked up by the city has basically doubled since 2020, 5.2 million to 10.4 million. So typically, when Matt and I review Schedule 19, the increases are modest. There's not a whole lot of digging going on as to the detail of this, but, I have to admit, I was taken aback when I saw a $3.5 million increase and realized that the city is solely responsible for those costs. So I'm before you here to try to work on some of the cost control measures that we have and that we may be able to take to get us over that, because quite frankly, the city doesn't have $3.5 million to increase special education, transportation, and otherwise. So some of the stuff I have is more questions to the school committee than facts, but I did pass out a couple of laws that I want to make sure I understand correctly. I'm not a lawyer, but I pretend to be one sometimes when I need to read these laws. But it's my understanding that Chapter 71, Section 68 says, the city is required to bus K through 6 students that live 2+ miles from their schools as a matter of law. Anything else that's done above and beyond that is a matter of preference to the school committee. So we have neighborhood schools K through 5, and I think for the most part, there's no transportation costs with them unless they have an IEP or special education. And is that correct?
Not really.
Okay, so then we have 6 through 8, which is our middle schools. Now, we have a lottery for middle schools that allow people to go cross city. However, if those middle schools were neighborhood middle schools, then essentially regular day transportation could be eliminated, assuming that everybody is within the radius of what the mass law says. So there is some argument that says we may not have to fund any transportation for students based upon logistics. So that's the law. I'm not here proposing anything. I just want to make sure we understand the law. The second law I passed out is Chapter 40. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'll get clarification if anyone has any questions. So I'm new to the school committee meeting, so don't want to. I passed out 2. I passed one out from the left to go right and one from the right to go left.
Well, I guess the ones on the left didn't want to share with the right.
Well, right now, Ms. Rizzo has a question for you, Richie.
Sure.
Not so much a question, it's just, you had said a lot of the things that people assume. And although I am all for the 2 miles plus with K through 5, our middle schools are lotteries. And they're not district schools. They really can't be. You can't say someone on Reservoir Ave, where are they going to school? What's their district? And I think that's kind of, a lot of people say generalize, make them district schools, but it really is difficult to define who's going where. We can assume someone belongs in this area, but they might not consider it their area. So as far as making it district schools right now, I don't see the possibility. I do agree, as long as it's a lottery, anyone over the 2 miles of the school that they're attended should not have to have transportation. And I do hope down the road, if we see this particular high school as a middle school, we can avoid all of that. Not that it makes any, doesn't help us right now. And again, I agree, the high school, it's not going to be, it's going to be frowned upon, my comments, but there's MBTA all throughout the city that comes directly right here. So I am for K through 5, and I am for anything over 2 miles for middle school until we have one central middle school.
Yeah, again, I'm just here stating facts as I understand them, just to make sure I'm clear, so that hopefully we can progress with some discussions on how to get to the middle of trying to rectify transportation. But again, by having a lottery for middle school is essentially an unfunded mandate on the city to provide transportation for those students.
Richie, Susan has a question, then I'll get you. Go ahead, Susan.
Obviously it's a problem with the transportation. Even if we did do neighborhood schools, so to say, you know, children in Beechmont would still probably be too far from the Garfield and would probably still require transportation, if we wanted to like redistrict and group them.
That may be fact, but I don't know that.
You don't have, okay.
But you might-
But that wasn't my exact question, was, now, is there some type of subsidized MBTA passes that the students can acquire through the city or through the school system, if need be, if they are required to take public transportation to school? The last I heard, there was, but it was still $30 a month for that one individual pass. Is that the case, the dollar amount for that, or?
So there are two different kinds of student passes that are available. Some of them, all students qualify for just by virtue of being in K-12 education, and we give those out to students routinely. They do have to put their own money onto the card in order to use it to ride the bus or the train, or the family has to. And they get that transportation at a reduced rate compared to regular MBTA transportation costs. There are other programs that some school districts engage in where they pay those costs for students. So they give them prepaid cards so the kids have free MBTA transportation. And I believe it is about $30 a month, which would come out to about $300 per student for the year.
You know, I do know some parents who now have to purchase two passes, which, you know, now it's 60, because they have two children.
Oh,
and
right, yeah.
So it's now $60 a month for that family to transport two of their children to school. So I didn't know if there was any other type of, you know, program that we could work on with a better reduced rate that would help these families out if the situation occurs that, you know, buses are limited.
There could be, and and there could be also an opportunity if buses were eliminated for us to say something like, we will pay for the bus pass if you live a certain distance away from the school. If you live within that distance, where theoretically it would take fewer buses or fewer switches in transportation, so therefore cost less, then it would, the burden would be on the family, or, you know, something like that. The school committee could certainly look at that.
For those that live further than the 2 miles.
Or even within the 2 miles,
Okay.
if you wanted to. That would be your purview.
Thank you.
Cheryl?
Rich, I know that this is not what you want to be discussing. You're just putting it out to us. But I'd like to harken back to 1999, which was the very first proposal that we put in to the state, to the Department of Education. And that included to build 5 new schools. And a crucial part of that plan was that we needed integration of our student population. We cannot keep people all in one neighborhood, because that would be very difficult, and sometimes there would be social implications, we know there would be, but there might have been political implications too. And the reason that we were approved for those 5 new schools, including the elementary and the middle schools, was that we had committed to have that integration of student population in the 3 middle schools. So what implications any change in that would mean, I'm not sure. And that's a conversation with people much higher up than we are. But just to put it out there, that it's a very complicated, very, very, very complicated issue about transportation. And it is probably the one about which I get the most calls. That's,
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think
I know.
I think that the middle school artery is wonderful. I have 2 daughters that went through the public schools. They were both served well by it. So this is just more of just facts that I want to give on what the real reality is. And the reality is, by having a lottery and having middle school kids bust across the city, we're then straddled with an unfunded mandate of getting those children to where they need to be. So I just, you know, when I hear it's the city's cost versus the school cost, I like to think of the city as one unit and the schools are a department of it. And I'm here to try to get us to deal with this problem together. So I'm only here just to give the facts as I understand them. And trust me, if I'm wrong, I want you to tell me I'm wrong.
No,
But
no.
Sometimes it's the rusty wheel getting the grease here, and this is the rusty wheel right now. So I need to get some more information and really try to work with the school committee to make this a reality if we're gonna keep transportation the way we've done it in the past.
Well, you used a key word there. You used the word integration, and that was the purpose of the entire plan. And it has worked certainly to the students' benefits over there. And your children were great students.
Thank you. So just to finish the thought on the law, it does say, and again, this isn't a proposal, but in the case transportation provided to students is not required, the school committee may assess fees for transportation up to the amount sufficient to cover those costs. So we do have an option to have transportation fees. And again, the discussion on whether we should or shouldn't do that is a much deeper discussion. But again, these are the laws that we have. So the second law I passed out is Chapter 40, Section 13E,
No.
and it's that would set up a reserve fund to pay for unanticipated or unbudgeted costs for special education, out-of-district tuition, and transportation. So as it stands right now, and this is maybe more for Matt or Dr. Kelly, we budget a gross amount for transportation for all the students, including out of district. Then there's things that trigger reimbursements that come back to the school department to be spent without further appropriation. And I need to get a better understanding of the mechanics of that, but there's a law on the books that would allow for those funds to be put into a special revenue account that would then be appropriated by both the school committee and the city council to really hone in on where those reimbursements are, and through my askings, it's usually put towards future years' costs. So I don't exactly know what happens to the reimbursements when they come in for the 4 times foundation budget or whatever the lingo is, but I do know that it doesn't come back into my coffers, and I can't plan to use that for additional years. And again, just a question to Matt on how that mechanics typically run, and maybe the idea of setting this special revenue account up so that we can actually spread a little sunshine on what these reimbursements are, how we generate them, and how they're used to kind of keep transportation costs in check so that we're not looking at a 50% increase at $10.5 million. Because just to put it in perspective, student transportation budget is in line with our police budget and our fire budget. So we're spending just as much on transportation as we are on our public safety. So it is an issue. It's almost its own budget in itself. So.
Sure, yes. So to speak to that question, there's a reimbursement that comes in from the Commonwealth for our homeless transportation. It comes in June, July. Last year it was $234,000, and it gets deposited directly against the homeless transportation account that we spend those funds from. You'll see in the detail of our budget that we're assuming a $250,000 reimbursement to help with those costs in the budget this year. New over the course of the last couple of fiscal years has been the special education circuit breaker program is not only reimbursing us for tuition costs that exceed the thresholds, but now they are doing the same with transportation. We just met for 45 minutes this morning working on that spreadsheet to make sure that those two things can be delineated. So in the coming fiscal year, I will be able to separate out the quarterly circuit breaker payment, what is for tuitions, and what is for transportation. And then we will be able to either credit that transportation amount against the special education account, or we can talk about carving that off each quarter and dropping it into a reserve fund. So there's 2 reimbursements that are coming in from the state for transportation. We mobilized the homeless one in real time, immediately. The special education one is brand new, so we can talk about how we would want to do that.
Matt, I have a question. What's anticipated for the circuit breaker this year?
This year's figure is $5.2 million coming in quarterly, and we'll be able to delineate out how much of that was a transportation claim. We're getting, it changes each year based on how much money the state has, but circuit breaker tuitions are being reimbursed at 75%. Transportation costs are only being reimbursed at 25%.
So that's pretty much what the ratio is gonna be then?
Yeah,
On about, say, the $1.2 million that we get every quarter? Would you
yes.
say that's pretty much the ratio, 75-25 tuition to transportation, or no?
No, what I mean is if you spent $100 on a tuition,
Right.
they're giving you back 75. If you spent $100 on transportation, they're only giving you back 25. Or that was the rates that were set. They reset them each year depending on their budget.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions about the circuit breaker or transportation for either Matt or Richie?
I would just like to point out that I believe that new law is being promoted, I think, in the latest budget at 50% reimbursement for transportation, and then by 2024, it's scheduled to be 75% for transportation. So
Nice.
there's a ramp-up effect to that. Again, some of this might require some legislative pressures that we may be able to give on our local senators and representatives, but this is a giant problem right now, and again, I'm just here to introduce the ideas that we may be able to implement to try to reduce these costs. But what does happen is that when the reimbursements come, they come to the schools, and they could be moved to other accounts. And again, I don't know the mechanics, but if we're truly getting reimbursements for out-of-district transportation costs and homeless costs, it may be prudent for us to put that money aside into a fund, and then we can debate on how we can use that and appropriate it to, kind of pay it forward in the future years. So, and we all know that we got a boatload of money from the federal government. The cities received $30 million. Schools have received about $28 million. I think some of those funds have to be considered to earmark to build a bridge so that we can come up with some future conversations and maybe create a committee or something to really drill down, because I think there's a lot of things we can do. I certainly don't want to try to discuss them right now today, but I think we have to progress those conversations.
So a couple of points of information, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first is that there's also a House Amendment number 1376 that's actually open for debate starting today. And that is a transportation pothole account, because the state recognizes that this is a problem at the state level. And the mayor and I sent a joint letter to our elected officials. His office, I believe, was sending it out today, advocating that this bill be passed, and in fact, that the amount of money, the $20 million that they have in it right now, be increased, because clearly with just Revere having a deficit of $3.4 million, the $20 million is not going to be enough for the entire Commonwealth, but it's one place that might be helpful. And then two other things that I just want to mention. One is we would absolutely put those reimbursement funds in the right account. We wouldn't be moving them around anywhere else, so you can rest assured of that. And also, it is something that we need to partner with and work on with the city, and we definitely want to solve all problems together. But it is ultimately, and I want to say, illegal for us to use Chapter 70 funding on transportation. And we've had some leeway with ESSER funding, that we were able to use that for transportation because of the COVID requirements that students be socially distanced and we not have full capacity on our buses and things like that. As those pieces are lifted, our ability to use ESSER for transportation costs will wane. And I believe that's the funding that you're talking about, the $27 million.
Yeah, you have $28 million and we have $30 million. So I'm saying in order to build a bridge to get to long-term solutions, this body and the city council may have to put some of those dollars towards this problem as a stopgap, because again, we don't have $3.5 million increase to fund without using one-time money, and I don't have to get into why using one-time money isn't good for recurring costs.
We all know that.
However, we have a problem. We are lucky enough to have this money dropped on our lap, and I know you're talking about hiring teachers and stuff, and some of that stuff may create funding cliffs. So I just think we have to look at tackling this problem together. And I certainly didn't want to insinuate that we could use Chapter 70 money to do that. So it's really more about if we're budgeting 100% of the gross cost of that, and you're getting reimbursed for that, I don't see, not intentionally, but I don't see the money trail and where that money goes, and whether it's just carried forward and it then can be blended in for something else. So I think it's important to kind of follow that money so that we can put in a special account so that the money derived from reimbursements for out-of-district special education tuition and homelessness tuition transportation, we can then appropriate against some of these budget items.
Right, and we will definitely get clearer on that for you. What I'm saying is that it absolutely goes back into transportation. We have new students come in all year long, and we don't come back to the city and say, we have a new contract for this particular student at, $500 a day, so give us that money now. We use those funds that come in to pay for those kinds of costs, and they only ever go into the transportation line item. They don't ever go into any other line items for carry forward.
Understood. And if those monies are segregated, we can certainly put it towards the same exact thing that you're doing it now, only we'd spread a little more sunshine on how that money's being used, and it wouldn't be lost in a netting process.
Absolutely.
All right, at this time, Susan, go ahead. Susan has a question.
Not really a question, more of a concern related to, potentially reducing or eliminating the buses for the school children. My concern is, how will that affect the lack of attendance in the students? You know what I mean? I mean, with some of our students living a distance, and some,
I'm
being
certainly
more-
not promoting that.
No, I know you're not.
I'm just saying what's
I'm
required
just
by
saying
law.
general, like to the whole committee, not to you in particular. It's just like for the whole, like I said, it's not a question, it's just a concern to bring out that, I'm concerned about how that will affect our students and if they'll choose just to not come to school because it's raining, or, they might have to walk their little brother or sister to school, so that's just something like, as a committee, I just wanted to bring up. I wasn't putting that guilt trip on you, Rich.
No guilt trip at all. I just want to make sure I'm clear and not being, misleading or anything,
Right.
because, even though we know it's a city responsibility, it's been told to me that, in order for the kids to go to school, they have to get to school. So I think it's a group problem, not a city problem.
And I'll add to that I think one of the complications in Revere that other districts might not experience so much is that we are a relatively tight-knit community with a lot of highways that traverse the city. And so students walking to school in Revere might be significantly different than it would be in some other communities, and that's certainly something that we need to think about.
All right, any other questions for Richie or Matt about transportation? Everybody's good?
Thank you for your
All right,
time.
thank you, Richie, appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
If the committee would like, we can ask Robin to put that on the agenda for the next school committee meeting.
What do we, about the transportation?
Transportation.
Sure.
Discussion as a whole, or something particular that?
No, I was thinking discussion of the whole, like I heard you mention, Mrs. Rizzo, an idea of eliminating transportation for kids who don't live more than 2 miles, for kids who live within 2 miles. We heard an idea about MBTA passes. We heard Mrs. Gravelisi's concerns about if attendance. I mentioned the safety concerns. I think those things would warrant more discussion.
So I would suggest it goes to Mr. Kingston's subcommittee, which is Transportation and Buildings.
Great.
In the interim, I'll be happy to provide a cost analysis to make sure everyone's clear on where the budget figure's coming from. And I'm happy to tease out the last 3 to 7 years of reimbursements that have come in whatever forms and where they've been deposited, so that we're also clear as a team on that.
John?
Matt, if it wouldn't be too much trouble and not too much work, I think it would be helpful if we had some breakdown on the bus, like maybe on the bus routes, and if something was to be cut, what the savings would be, so to speak. Not saying I want to cut buses, I'm not saying that, but if, if the cost savings wasn't that much, then if we're, if the kids are being impacted greatly by a small cost savings, then, because I thought about the lottery myself and moving kids around, but the city's pretty spread out, as Dr. Kelly said. We said we don't bus elementary kids, but I believe we do, because there's a bus that goes from North Revere to either the Lincoln or the Whalen. I know that for a fact, because I volunteered at the Lincoln for 10 years, and the bus came every day. So I'm not saying it's a lot of money, I'm not saying it's a big run, I'm not saying it's not necessary, but I would say from the Lincoln School to North Revere is more than 2 miles. And it's not something I'd want to walk. So if you could just break out the savings, because I'm wondering if, how much savings is actually there. In cutting out something like that.
Yes,
It's not too much trouble to work the numbers.
No.
And maybe even work the lottery numbers just to see what that would be, how many runs are dedicated to the lottery, and that may not be a big number either, so, in future years, we're not, it's just, I was curious about the numbers myself, as far as breaking out the budget. I mean, the special needs budget is pretty much set, and if that number was known as well, and you know what the special needs is and what the regular student is as well. I think the numbers would be helpful, because if we say, okay, someone says, we'll cut a bus run and save some money, well, what did we really save? And if the number's not that high, and, God forbid a child got hurt, I'm not gonna be comfortable with my vote. So, but if that's a huge number, and you say to me, well, we could save $500,000 or whatever, then I guess it's food for thought, but I don't know that some of those runs are that expensive. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be reviewing the price proposal from our bidder on the yellow bus routes sometime this week or next week with our purchasing agent, so I'll have a beat on that number. And just as a for example, Denise and I did the exercise of saying if we transported no one to the high school, it would be a $350,000 savings. But then we run into the issues of past practice. Kids in the Pines, kids in Beachmont, kids in North Revere have traditionally gotten on buses to get to the high school. So those are the tough decisions that we need to talk about. So I'm happy to do some more work with Denise on that.
That's kind of my point. I don't know how many kids were busing to the high school, but 350,000, while it's not a small number, it's not a huge number either. And like I said, one kid gets hurt, that's all we need. And unfortunately, the city is so spread out. You've got North Revere, you have the Pines, even Beachmont. We kind of have, it's just not, they're not close. We're not, the city geographically isn't like a perfect little square. It's pretty spread out. And, kids are going to need to get bused from the Pines. It's just, it's not 2 miles. Not 2 miles to any school. Thank you.
Yeah, but I see one problem with this, is that we're gonna try to compare apples and apples. Where last year's runs might have been $200, where this year it's gonna be $450. So the numbers are gonna be way a lot higher this year. It's just a matter of where we get the best bang for the dollar, the way I think we really have to look at it. Whether we have to cut runs out or we have to add them, we have to feel we can maximize the dollars here, where the number, as you can see, is over $10 million. And, I mean, realistically, how much you really gonna save on it? I'm not saying to cut them or add to it, you just have to try to do the best you can with the money. Especially where the runs are gonna be higher this year. All right, any other questions for transportation? Okay. Matt, do you wanna, basically give us an overview, of the Schedule 19? It looks pretty straightforward, and go into the salary accounts?
Yeah, there's not much, so Schedule 19 is straightforward. You have to remember this is a work in progress. So since March, we've gotten news from the benefits office that premiums will be frozen for next year, so that number will change. The House has a very different number for choice and charter school charges and feedbacks. We're working on transportation. So there's a few moving parts throughout the month of March and April on Schedule 19. The rest kind of stands standard practice of the agreements that we've had with the city to just make everything flow. And then I think rather than talking through every line, I think if you want to flag something and say, hey, can you tell us about this, then Diane or I will be happy to answer. Again, this is the first draft. I did all the work of analyzing last year's costs. We did all the work of moving all the staff into the positions that they're in and affecting pay raises. So this is a really good first draft of the budget, but that's what it is. It's a first version. There's probably 20 little mistakes in here that will be teased out over the next 6 weeks. But if there's big picture items that you would like to ask about, I think that would be the most fruitful use of the time.
Sure. At this time, Carol?
Well, I just noticed line item called non-employee insurance. It's not very much money at all, but I don't know what it is.
Sure, that's just shared insurance for the city for liability on sidewalks, for vehicles, things that we save money by doing it together.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Can I make one more overview
Sure,
statement?
Go ahead, Dr. Kelly.
So as Mr. Cruz presented at the very beginning, what you're looking at in this first version of the budget is the rollover of all services and salaries from last year into this year. And you'll see that there's a $59,000 or $60,000 dollar bit of cushion there. There is the reserve funding intact for Esser Cliff. That's also on the bottom of the first page. That's the $3.6 million. And that is an area where the committee could also make a determination if they wanted to spend additional funds. So we have talked over the last couple of years about priorities of the district, some of which included adding, for example, a fine arts director. Some included work we need to do with our English language department, where we are at a bare minimum of staffing there. And our increase in EL enrollment requires some additional EL teachers. And there are, of course, the principal wish lists for what they would like. None of those matters are included in this budget. So as we're looking through it, I just wanted to make that point so that you can think about any additional programming that you wanted to bring on board, and of course, the transportation piece that we talked about. So I just wanted to frame this discussion that's going to happen now in that context.
John, do you have any questions that you would like to ask about any of the series for the salary accounts?
No, I have no questions. No, I have no questions at this time.
Ms. Rizzo? I've already asked my board.
Michael,
Yes, yes,
I'm
Aisha.
so sorry. I did have a question. I just want to briefly ask this. It does go back to transportation, and
Go ahead.
maybe this has been discussed in the past. But has there been any discussion about possibly privatizing buses and gaining ownership of our own bus transportation instead of relying on these outside vendors?
Yes, we're doing that to the greatest degree that we can. One of the issues is storage of the buses. So if you took a ride through the back of the high school at the end of a school day, you will see nose to nose every vehicle that we own, and there's not even an extra tenth of an inch of sidewalk space where we've put them. So one of the challenges is the maintaining of a fleet that big in a city like ours, where storage is just a non-starter of an issue, or to incur the costs of storage for the vehicles begins to defeat the purpose of doing the privatization work. So that and some other challenges are reasons that we don't just simply bring everything in-house, hire dozens of drivers, and have dozens and dozens of vehicles, for example.
And you did do an analysis a couple years ago about what the cost would be to bring the entire services into the district. And maybe we could share that again. I know the numbers are probably a little outdated, but.
Right, so it's an excellent question to be asking, because several years ago we went through that exercise. But like Michael was saying, if that exercise was done when it was $213 a run, and now it's $450 a run, how is that affecting the work that we had done in there? So, but we've spent a lot of time thinking on that. If it was as simple as, let's just do it all ourselves, then we would be taking that action more seriously. What we do is we maximize our staff and vehicles to save as much money as we can, and then the rest is spinning out, which has only gotten out of control in the last couple of years.
But it might be a good time to do that review again.
Thank you.
All right, at this point, I just have, Matt, I have 3 questions about the salary account. On the 1,000 series, the human resource budget went up 170,000. And I realized that we added 2 people, plus a potential 3rd person there. Yeah, 3rd.
Can you give us a page reference, Michael?
All right, I'm on page 3, then on page 8, there's 3 people. The HR director, HR generalist, and the row.
Sure, I can speak to that. So one of the things you'll notice in this budget, in both the salary and the non-salary sections, is that we are formally establishing a human resources department in the budget for the first time. There was a small budget for salaries previously, and so you're going to see that both salary and non-salary for HR jumps dramatically. Part of that is the addition of an HR director that's never been budgeted before. We've replaced a clerical staff who had been doing HR with an HR generalist. So there's increased costs for that payroll. And we've also moved the committee that's been doing backup HR work into that department. So some of that is not new costs, it's just appearing to you differently so that it's housed properly. But the big jump is in the HR director has never been budgeted before. So that's now showing as its own standalone item in the budget.
My question is that I'm really not sure because the number budgeted for the director was $115,000. I thought the salary was $80,000. Or am I mistaken in that?
We had originally put it out at 80,000, and I came back to the committee when there was a request for an increase in that salary, and I believe the 115 also includes a pay raise for next year.
Okay. All right, my other question goes on page 4, negotiations. It's obviously an $800,000 deficit. What's the purpose, Matt, of having money in there at all if all the contracts are done?
The contracts aren't done. So as of the doing of this budget in mid-March, AFSCME had not been ratified yet. And so I did not go into those people's line and give them the increase. I don't technically have the right to do that until it's been finally and fully signed off. So I'm hoping to, before the last version of the budget happens, to affect those changes. And what will happen is you will see the negotiations line right now drop, and you will see the individual places where AFSCME and people who track with AFSCME increase. We just had not affected that change because this was done in early March.
And so we have reached a tentative agreement with AFSCME. We're waiting on their ratification vote, and then it'll come to the school committee for a vote, and that's when Matt can actually do that work.
All right. And my last question on page 5, we have a new category in the 3000 series, health aides. Get a quick explanation of that, please?
Sure. We had no health aides before the pandemic, and in the pandemic we brought on a number of health aides to help with those needs, and they were covered in the ESSER 2 grant for 1 year, and so now they've been moved into the appropriated side of the budget. So that's why you see it going from 0 to the full amount of the health aides cost.
Okay. Any questions from the other members here? Stacy?
Where was my first one? My first one was building technology, and it went from 14 to 12. It lowered.
What page?
Yep.
Page 15.
So that was just housekeeping work done with Jonathan Ferrara and asking him, hey, exactly who do you actually supervise? Because that's who we should receive credit for in that fund code. So there was a few folks who for years had shown up on that page, but were more appropriately slotted with the regular education paraprofessionals.
Okay, and one on the 4000 series, there's an additional tradesperson put in, and I know at the last meeting I asked for a list of the tradespeople and what their specific trade was. So I'm kind of curious. 73? Try 73. I have no glasses on. That's it. 73. So,
Yes, so the question about the trade, I'm happy to circle back with Amber and see if she can get the committee that through Carl. The reason you're seeing the number is the same ESSER was funding for us the addition of a tradesman, and now that's coming into the budget.
what is the particular trade we're looking at? That's what I'm kind of...
That was the carpentry position that Michael Stewart took.
So we have an extra
we have an additional maintenance position that we've been working on for about 4 years, with agreement with AFSCME to increase maintenance position and reduce custodial position by 1. And we finally implemented that last year. Michael Stewart got that position. It's under the carpentry construction generalist field, if you will. And the first year we paid for it through ESSER, and now it's being moved into our budget.
Okay, and if, I know your plate is full, but can we get that list of the trade people and what the trade, specific trades they have?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the salary accounts?
So I would like to go back to what Superintendent Kelly had said earlier about the Fine Arts Director, that we have not had since Ms. Agneta retired about 24 years ago. And I look at these teachers, whether it be music, art, theater, that have had no direction or nothing to, no support system, really. I know there's people here that they're under, but without knowing what their real value is, it's really hard for them to see what is needed. I really would, and then I'm thinking, we have Director of World Languages. We have all the C2C programs for those people to help others. We also have the guidance director that is, I think, 12 to 14 guidance counselors. So we have directors for things, like some people look at fine arts, there's only a certain amount of educators that are in that block, but it's not about that. It's about the support, and it's about the knowledge to build on it. And let's face it, our kids need a reason to come to school. Whether it's not technology, it may be through the arts. And I have to say, after traveling through different states and being introduced to other communities and what they've been doing, I'm just simply amazed. And just to be local, when I look at Everett High in their band, they've been invited to Washington, D.C., they've been invited to Hawaii, and I was just talking to Senator Sal DiDomenico last week, who chaperones those. It's just such a building experience for the students and the families, and so much pride for the city. So I would like to see Fine Arts Director in some form. Please. I've asked for 10 years.
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, well, I second that motion, even though it wasn't a motion, because we have had such great work in the art department and the music department, and I do think that working there, and as you remember, I'm always asking that STEM should be changed to STEAM, so that the arts are extremely important. They're important not only from an emotional point of view, but for the improvement in the brain activity as well, when you do use your hands and your imagination and your emotions and so forth. So I'd second that. I'm also concerned about our increase in ESL population, that we have had such a tremendous increase. And I think of how difficult it must be to be handling people who, children who speak many different languages. It was once that everybody who came here spoke Italian and that was the only language. And now there are so many different languages. So, Dr. Kelly, I know that you spoke to us once about increasing staff in the ESL department. What staff do we need?
So, and I know that Ms. Labalita, who's done a phenomenal job since she's been with us, feels strongly, and she actually put together some data about what other school districts do, and there are a lot of districts with far fewer EL students than we have who have a multi-person department. One of the things that's changed in recent years with our English language learner population is the state requirements around testing, both baseline testing when they first enter the district and then annual progress monitoring that's required. And I know that at a minimum, right now, she's sharing a secretary with the rest of the curriculum directors, and there is another secretary at the PIC who splits time between doing PIC organizational work, which is really important, obviously, in our Parent Information Center, and then doing some of the intake for the new English learner students. And I know that Ms. Labolita would appreciate having a full-time position there. And then with all of the compliance requirements, I have to say that she did an absolutely masterful job starting here in July and taking us through. Last week. We had our audit from the Department of Education, and those findings are going to come out shortly. We did get a preview from the committee just before they left. They'll send formal writing shortly, and that'll be shared with the school committee. But they said that we need an assistant director of English learner students to work on the compliance pieces and make sure families and parents are getting the notifications that they're supposed to be getting in multiple languages in a timely manner. There are a couple of schools where the ratio between teachers and students is currently lacking, and we need additional English learner teachers in those schools. But Ms. Labolita would also like to see a couple of coaches. Right now we have one EL coach in the district to help our regular education teachers understand how to help their students access the curriculum when they have language barriers. And I know that she would like to increase that to 3, one at the elementary level, one at the middle, and one at the high school. So those are some major pieces that I think are really important. And when I look at the district goals that we've all agreed to work on, I think that those positions really speak to that. And in my mind, in addition to the fine arts, which I agree with Mrs. Rizzo and I agree with Ms. Ty, that that's a necessary position, those are the other pieces that I think we should prioritize. And if I could add one more, and we will do a cost analysis of all of this for you to give to the school committee. The Lincoln School enrollment is now at a height almost equal to the Hill School. And when we added the second administrators, the second assistant principals at the Wayland and the Hill and the Garfield, we left Lincoln off of that list, but they're at the point now where they really need an additional administrator, especially to help with the volume of students who are transitioning into school after COVID and not necessarily understanding how to be in school.
Yeah. So can we have a cost analysis of the addition of these
Yeah,
new positions?
sure. And are there other positions that the committee wanted to put forward at this time that we can include in that cost analysis?
Sure.
Dr. Kelly, has the ESL director ever talked about doing dual enrollment?
She has, and she has actually said that her next priorities, there just isn't capacity to do this right now, where she's basically running the program by herself. Her next 2 focus areas are going to be extending our world languages program to the middle school and introducing dual language programs at the elementary level.
Oh, I look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Susan?
Thank you, Mr. Franti. One area I feel like we sometimes never have a conversation about is how many PTAs and OTs we have currently and how many of our students require those services and what the ratio would be between the PTAs and the OT per student. I feel like it's an area that sometimes goes unnoticed, but those services are really important.
So we'll get that analysis for the next budget meeting as well.
And
I'm also going to include SLP.
Do you have something to say?
And Susan, did you hear that? Richie will include our speech language pathologist in that count.
Great, thank you. Again, another area that is sometimes forgotten about, but It's
Which
another
would
area
be
that
one-
sometime- Right, we don't always discuss, but just to make sure the ratio of those specialists per student is up to the standard it should be.
Which I'm hoping when the new Director of Health and Wellness comes on, that will be someone that can speak up for those departments and will be helpful when they come.
I have two questions. Well, not really questions. Diane, I did send you something yesterday about the full-time pre-K. Is this something we can look into?
Yes, so the full-time pre-K, I was hoping is something that we would be realizing when the McKinley School opens. We're not looking at it as something that we would be implementing for next school year.
All right, thank you. And Matt, could we get a breakdown of the employees that we're hiring last year versus this year to see if there's an increase or decrease in employees?
Well, it is on your thing.
Sure, the only reason that
like
that's
that.
not included in this draft is there's so many moving parts right
Okay.
now, but in the next version, you'll be able to see series and department within series, an FTE comparison from last year to this year. Yep.
Does anybody have any other questions at this time? Well, then I have two. Number one, we did budget money for a transportation director. Are we going that route for July 1st?
Denise has been named the transportation director.
And that takes care of that one. Okay. And I noticed something on page 42, that we have an NEASC accreditation, something new. NESAC. Can somebody just explain to me what it is and?
Sure, that is the 10-year annual accreditation of the high school. We have our
Okay.
decennial visit coming up next year.
Okay.
And so those funds are required to house the visiting team and feed them and do all of that.
All right, go ahead, John.
Dr. Kelly, because we are in the process of hopefully building a new school, will they forgive us for some of our current sins?
They will look very favorably on the fact that we're in the process of building a new school.
Thank you.
Anybody else at this time? Any other questions? Okay, Matt, when do you think that the next version will be available for us?
So what I'll do is I'll adjust Schedule 19 to account for the most recent numbers from the state. If it's the House, that's what we'll use. If it's the Senate soon, then we can use that. And I will have a bunch of more work that I can do in the weeds now that 6 weeks has passed. We have a meeting on Friday morning about transportation. So we'll see what comes of that meeting. And, part of the issue is how at some point, we got to agree to a Schedule 19 and and he has, Rich, the city needs to know their number so that we can know ours. So we'll be working on that this week too. And then the action points that were given, I'll be working on toward the end of this week, the beginning of next week also. So that the tail end of next week, we should have a whole bunch of that work pushed together to be able to get to Ways and Means of version 2 to look at.
So I say a couple weeks?
Yep.
So, Matt, can I ask you, when you speak on transportation, and I'm sure calendars don't line up, but could you at least have conversations with John so that he can bring this information forward to his subcommittee
Oh, sure.
for discussion?
Yep.
Thank you.
And actually, John, you can come to that meeting if you want. It was just going to be us with Rich and the mayor. And I'll also ask Robin to work with John to schedule a transportation subcommittee meeting. Next week, I'm out of the country, actually.
Nice.
So, well, for work in Canada. But maybe for early the week after that, we can,
I have a final question for Matt, if you guys can hear me.
we can, go ahead.
Is there a breakdown for the allocation of athletics? I've been looking through here and I just can't find it.
Yeah, it's going up 2%.
Sure. So you'll see on the salary side of the budget, find the page number.
Page 5 is athletic.
see the salaries, but I wasn't able to see like the amounts that were allocated for various sports programs throughout the district.
Okay, so on the salary side, you do see director, trainer, and then each individual coach that we pay.
What page is that?
That's page 66. And then if you go to the non-salary, we don't require the athletic director to make a breakdown beyond what's appearing on page 115. So in there, you can see he has a budget for services, supplies, referees, rentals, insurances, etc. And then we've been working to align our middle school programming with the GBL requirement, so there's a infusion of funds in there as well. That's on page 115.
So if we wanted to know though, how much was, say, allocated towards, soccer as opposed to, girls' basketball or whatever the sport may be, there's no way for us to have something that shows us that breakdown?
So you can solicit that from the athletic director. The reason we don't do it here in the budget is because the DESC does not break 3,000 series expenses across either school or any other, next layer down. So on the 3,000 and 4,000 series, we don't get down to that level. I'm happy to talk with Frank and say, hey, when you think about the 175 that would be budgeted to you, how are you mobilizing that? Some of it will be by sport, some of it will be costs that apply to all sports. So that would be something that the athletic department would have.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So Aisha, I would recommend to you as the chair of the health subcommittee, maybe if you go through Diane requesting a breakdown from Mr. Shea.
Okay.
Are there any more questions at this time for Dr. Kelly, for Matt? I guess not.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Doc.
I asked the committee to consider, and I'd like to propose in the next version of the budget as well, is the right sizing of principal salaries. And I think if you look at pages 12 and 13 of this budget, you can compare how little some of our principals are making compared to assistant principals. And part of that is a function of contract changes that the RAA has benefited from, as they should. But it means that some principals, and I'll use Beachmont, for example, are making significantly less than their assistant principal. And especially in light of the challenges we're going to face around recruitment, I think that we need to do some rethinking, not of all of these salaries, but of some of these salaries, in order to ensure that our principals are being rightly valued.
Dr. Kelly, can I just, I look at it, I look at the principals, I look at assistant principals, but I always keep in mind, let's say for Beachmont, how many years in education or as a principal compared to maybe the assistant principal at Paul Revere? I mean, there's many more years, so.
If I may, that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
The structure, because, I mean, obviously, when you get in there, if you're negotiating, then it applies to everyone. But when and that's a perfect example that you picked, the Paul Revere School. Nevertheless, it just seems to me to be way out of whack that the assistant principal should be making more than the principal, or even close to it. So I think maybe I'd like to look at an analysis of that.
I also look at the fact, and don't get me wrong, I know there's a ton of work on everyone's plate.
Yes.
But most of them have already gotten 2 assistants to take some of that off their plate. I'm just being the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everyone, I don't care who it is, deserves more. But I'm just trying to look at it. I don't see, I don't see why you can't bring it forward and we can have a discussion on that. I mean,
It just doesn't seem to me to make any sense at all. And that's, I know historically, we've had a real problem. I mean, this goes way back to my tenure. It goes back to the time I was teaching, when you'd be saying to someone, well, listen, you'd be a great principal there. How about, applying for the job? And they say, no. Look, I have my job, I have my longevity. I'll take some credit for that myself. And I have my longevity, and I have 2 extracurricular activities, and I have the summer off.
Exactly.
I don't want to be a
Exactly.
principal. They work all year round.
And
They
they
can
don't.
barely take their vacation days.
and I can't blame
And
them.
that becomes a real problem, too. So, thank you for bringing it up, Stacy. I think we'll be observant of maybe many of the discrepancies that are existing now.
Well,
and have
Carol,
existed.
you as the chair of personnel, I'm putting that under your hat.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do
Okay.
that. And I think I could work with, on Ways and Means, too, with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Diane, which ones are you going to make your pitch for? No, I want to know.
Well, I'm not thinking about individuals. I'm sorry. I'm not thinking about individuals, really. I'm thinking about, in general, what would be seen as desirable compensation to change from an assistant principal to a principal position. As you know, we get very few internal candidates for our principal positions, and
Right.
as Carol Ty just explained, that's why. The cost analysis versus a life-work balance is very different. And so one of the things that I had talked about before was moving elementary principals to 140, middle school to 150, and high school to 160. And some of them are already in those ranges, so that's fine. Their salary would stay where it is. It's the people who are not there yet that I feel, and especially in light of the last 2 years, when I can tell you every single one of our principals was an absolute yeoman. That I think the right sizing is necessary.
Well, let's not speculate about the amount of money now.
Okay.
Let's just get a look at it and see what it
Please.
is. Because they have been done yeomanly service, and not that other people haven't. I mean, I've been so proud about how hard everybody worked during the pandemic, and then adjusting to after the pandemic is just as difficult, too. So we know that kids have real problems, and teachers do, too.
This is basically the topic of the conversation we had with the Board of Education this morning. So maybe you'll all find time to listen to those remarks, but
I can
that-
send you a
that's what they're
link,
about, yeah.
everyone.
Thank you.
Anyone else I haven't given a job to as a chair?
Happy to take it up.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Go ahead, John.
I agree with Dr. Kelly on the principals getting an increase. I think it's important. I think it's difficult to have your assistant make as much or as almost the same as you. I don't think it's fair. I don't care how much longevity it is. The buck stops with the principal, not the assistant, and the assistant has a lot more time off than the principal does, and it just doesn't seem fair to me, so I totally agree. It's important to have good leadership at the schools. With ed reform, the principal really does have a huge role in the school, and I think it's important that they get paid well so that we're able to retain what we have, because finding replacements is always difficult. So I totally agree with Dr. Kelly on that. Thank you.
Okay, so come to the meeting.
I will, if I can make it.
Okay, any other questions, comments for anybody?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, all opposed? So voted. There you go.